this morning, and I want to talk to you, and this really dovetails really well into what Don was talking about. Over the last 15 years, we have been working with BGW to really find sustainable solutions for the better, more effective, and financially responsible way to use church buildings. One of the things all of us know as church leaders is sometimes our church buildings, although beautiful and function well when we use them, are grossly underused. That there's spaces of our building that only get used maybe 6-7 hours a week tops, and then they get shut down and shuttered. And so we started to look as a group of pastors and church planners at how can we use our buildings more efficiently and effectively, not just financially, but also for ministry to further the gospel. And as Don shared today, we've looked at a lot of different options: event centers, shared workspace, athletic centers, coffee shops. But our favorite that we love to talk about, and one that we are doing more and more inside of churches, is early childhood education. Now, let me give you this caveat. Most churches, when they hear daycare or preschool, think back to a time in the 80s and 90s when a lot of churches tried their hand at this, right? They opened small schools, and typically those schools weren't super successful. As a matter of fact, we talk to churches all the time that tell us we tried to open a childcare center or a preschool or a daycare, and it didn't make us money, it cost us money. The wear and tear on our building was ridiculous. Our building smelled like diapers all the time that we were in there, and it was something that we chose to shutter. A few of the problems that I think churches ran into in the childcare market was this. First of all, we are not experts in childcare, right? And so a lot of times we set our hands at things that we do not fully understand. The second problem is running childcare centers is operationally challenging. It takes a lot of employees, a lot of work that just quite honestly is outside of the skills, gifts, talents that we and our staff have, right? And so typically, when churches try to run childcare, they make mistakes in running them. A few of the mistakes that churches make in the operation, first of all, is they just don't build them big enough. If you think about it, most failed church childcare endeavors were usually schools that were built for somewhere between 40 and 60 students. What we have found is that for childcare to be sustainable, the magic number is about 100 students. So your profit really begins above 100 students. It takes about 100 students, full-time students, to make a childcare center work. And that word full-time is a very important word too. A lot of times what churches did is they opened up to part-time care, Mother's Day out programs, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which prove almost impossible to staff because you have to hire a full-time staff not knowing the number of kids that are going to be there on any given day. And so what we have done is we have partnered with operational partners that come alongside of the church and do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to operating these spaces. Because what we know is one of the most underutilized space inside of any church is the children's ministry space. But it's a space that has to be done well. It's a space that typically takes up a lot of real estate, a lot of square footage inside of a building. As a matter of fact, it's one of the primary reasons that people who visit your church, especially young families, are going to come back a second time. Did their kids have a great experience at church? Did their baby have a safe experience when they were dropped off at the nursery? So building exceptional kids ministry space is just a normal part of the conversation that we have with churches all the time. And we began to ask the question, what would happen if we could take that space and turn it into a ministry center Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., a time where that space is typically not being used at all. So how do we do this? There are three primary models that we use. Typically, we'll start by having a conversation with the church, just talking about the space that you expect to have. We'll do a quick demographic study of your location, and all of this is done for free for churches. And then we'll put together a simple pro forma, just looking at what are the typical tuition rates in your community, what number of kids do you have around you that are in need of childcare, and what do we anticipate the mix would be. We can put all of these numbers together and really come up with a feasibility number to say whether or not we have a go or no-go situation inside of your church. Just to give you a few numbers to think about, typically a school with about 130 kids, which is kind of the smallest school that we shoot for. So small being 130. We're actually adding to a church in McKinney, Texas right now that is expanding their school to 400 kids. They've experienced such great success there at Brookhaven that they are continuing to expand. So they can get pretty large, and as you can imagine, the larger they are, the more effective the ministry is, but also the more financially beneficial they are to the church. So typically for about 130 kids, we need somewhere between 10,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet. So that's including space for the kids. That's not outdoor space, so you do need playgrounds and some things that you might not be thinking about on your project. But by and large, we need 8 to 12 classrooms. So these classrooms are dialed in to meet state ratios. So we have the right number of teachers, the right number of students, and the right number of square footage. So we really dial in the design of the building to make sure that it's going to work well as a profitable center for you and for your church. And what we see is that not only is this a financially beneficial and sustainable model, but it's an incredible business model. Because I think the moment that the church stepped away from education, we made a grave mistake. That we stepped out of education and we started to allow our government to raise our kids. Like from infant to kindergarten, children who are in daycare, which by the way is over 70% of families today, because of the economic climate that we live in, where a dozen eggs cost $47, I think that's the number. We live in a world where mom and dad both have to work. Actually, most families are running today on average on 2.5 incomes, which means either mom or dad is working a part-time job aside from their full-time job to support and to raise their family. And their kids that go to childcare for the first 5 years of their life, which are some of the most formative years of a child's life, will spend more time in that daycare facility than they will with their mom and dad. What an incredible opportunity for the church. Because we live in a world today that is trying to tell our kids that their identity is found in so many trivial and silly things. And if we can establish in these kids at a young age that their hope is built on nothing less than Jesus and how much he loves them and cares for them, I believe we can change our world. We've been doing ministry in inner cities and hard places at the Genesis Project for 20 years, and here's what we've realized. There are some times that we reach a mom or a dad in a moment that, man, sometimes drug addictions are hard to break. Like sometimes that generational bad that just builds up in someone's past is overwhelming. And we believe one of the most effective ways that we can break the generational curses that the Bible tells us are passed down from father to son for generations is to do so in a kid's life. Is to go to double down on kids ministry. And what childcare centers give us the opportunity to do is to do kids ministry, biblical Christian education, not just on Sundays and Wednesday nights, but 5 days a week where we have kids that we can invest in and pour into. This also gives us an incredible opportunity to invest in young families. We do strategic planning and coaching with about 40 to 50 churches a year. And I can tell you this, it is rare that we step into a church that says we're great at reaching young families. Like that's just something we do really good. We don't need to talk about it. We're awesome at it. It's very rare that we don't go into a church and one of the first action items that we come up with when we start looking at mission, vision, and values is a church saying we need to reassess our strategy of reaching young families. Childcare is an incredible way to do that. Let me tell you this. You want to be the hands and feet of Jesus to an unchurched single mom dropping off a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning? Give her a cup of coffee. And be there for her when she picks up her kids, because what happens is these families who largely are disconnected from church, when they run into a crisis in life, if their kids are in your school, you're the church they're going to lean on. And we actually have staff inside of all of our schools. Their job is to pastor that school. So they're listening when grandparents die, when a new sibling is born. They're doing hospital visitations, and they're walking with this family as if they were already a part of your family and congregation because, oh, by the way, they are. They might just not know it yet. So it's a great ministry opportunity to grow churches and to reach families. But like I said, it's also an incredible economic engine that can help offset a lot of the debt and liability that we're going to be talking about later today. So 3 models really quick, and then I'd love to show you an opportunity that you can connect, and we'd love to do some free assessment for you and your community. Which, by the way, we know this area, Dallas-Fort Worth, is a great area that's hungry for childcare. So it's a great model here in your community. The first model we have is a consulting model. What we realize oftentimes is there's not room in a smaller church or smaller community. If we're looking at numbers that are closer to that 100 than they are the 200, sometimes it's great to have a consultant that can come in, that can help you navigate the startup process, can come in as an expert to train, hire, build a staff that is built to ultimately, inside of that first 12 to 18 months, find the footing to stand on their own. So at that point in time, if a school is only profiting, say, $8,000 a month, which, by the way, is a small profit, that's usually a profit that a business partner would look and say there's just not enough room or profit there for 2 parties to split. It just doesn't leave enough for any party. So in those small areas, sometimes consulting works so a church can experience 100% of that profit once they move down the road. So that's kind of a consulting and self-management model for churches that we'd love to discuss. The second option we have is working with a partner. So we have multiple partners that we work with who do childcare management. At that point in time, you're bringing in a childcare program into your school that's fully managed by the partner, and you become more of a landlord that gets to oversee the ministry of the school, and the partner gets to oversee the operation of the school. These models work well when we can build a large enough school that there's enough profit to go around and kind of keep everybody whole and moving forward at that point in time. The third model that we'd love to talk to you about is really a classical Christian education model. The first 2 models typically function by receiving state funding. So you go through state certifications and jump through all of the hoops to get that state license to hang on your door. That state license allows you to receive state money for kids who are coming to your school, which, by the way, receiving state money does not stop you from preaching the gospel and offering a Christian education. But there are opportunities. We're working with a church in Pensacola, Florida right now that has a 200-child waiting list, and they are a fully private school that does not take state funding. So their community is saying, we want classical Christian education. And here's the deal with state vouchers. Typically, state vouchers pay somewhere between 60 and 80% of full tuition. You don't charge the rest of that to the parent. So what ends up happening when you take state vouchers is that the private pay families pay a little bit more to compensate for the discount of the state paid family. So there's a ratio you have to navigate there. If it works in your community to say, hey, we're just going to get our certification not through the state, but through a Christian organization that certifies early childhood education, and we're just going to be a private, classically Christian school, sometimes that works and allows churches to begin this process with a far less intensive on-ramp, if that makes sense. So without a lot of the state certifications and so on and so forth. So those are all conversations we would have. And typically when we look at the feasibility, we look at it as a red light, yellow light, green light system, which, green light being, hey, let's go. This looks good. Demographics are good. This is what we have to do. Yellow light being, hey, you're close, but let's give the community a couple years to really grow into a need for this school. And then a lot of times a red light is the community's just not there yet. You know, you've got schools around you that aren't full, and maybe we'll just have to look at another option and another model for you. But I'll tell you this, one of the things, especially if you're going into a new construction project, we would always recommend designing your kids' ministry area to facilitate a school, even if you're not planning on opening one right away. It's always a great option to have down the road, and Don will share this with you a little bit later. The way we design those rooms and kind of dial them in is very different for a children's church Sunday school program than it is for a preschool, but we can do that in a way that you always have that option to lean into, because we believe that this is one ministry model that has a complete overlap between business and ministry. And we love that because we believe that this is a great use of space to disciple young people and to reach young families. And I'll give you this statistic, and then I'm going to pass it off to another partner. But did you know that over 75% of the Church of America today made a decision to follow Jesus before the age of 12 years old? Which means that we have a ticking clock with every young person in our community, knowing that if we can reach them at the ripe and fruitful age before they turn 13 and lose their minds. I've raised 4 teenage boys, I know this. Then we can change a community through the hearts and the minds of young people.